I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Rohit Gawal is a partner in Everest Group's global sourcing practice. In his role, he focuses on engagement initiatives with global companies that focus on GBS shared services centers. He works exclusively with global organizations and GBS clients on their talent strategies, including global workforce planning, innovative talent acquisition, and management. Amir Khan is a senior analyst with Everest Group's Talent Excellence practice. In his role, he focuses on conducting research and assisting clients on topics related to workforce trends and talent acquisition, development, and retention strategies. Mihir Bade is a senior analyst with Everest Group's Talent Excellence practice. In his role, he focuses on conducting research and assisting clients on topics relating to workforce trends and talent acquisition, development, and retention strategies. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Rohit.
Thanks, Peter. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone who are dialing in from different parts of the world. It's really good to have you all here and reflect on the talent market trends from this year and also look forward into some of our key recommendations as you think about your 2024-2025 strategy. As we kick off today, we thought it would be good to reflect back on some of the key messages we laid out in the beginning of this year, around February 2023. So let's do a quick recap and then cover the latest insights we have for you today. We outlined 4 key messages a few months back. The first one was that the market was moving into an extended phase of slow economic growth. There was an evident dip in demand for tech talent. We will reflect on how that panned out in the last few months and what's the projection. The second one was, as a result of the first one, companies were starting to lay off technology talent. A lot of these companies overhired or overestimated their needs in 2021, 2022. As a result, they were laying off quickly, a lot of it for stakeholder management, shareholder management. At the same time, we saw a lot of this talent that was laid off got absorbed in other parts of the market very quickly because many others were looking to capitalize. Let's see how that continued. The third key takeaway was that the market situation was improving in terms of the supply-demand dynamics. 2021, we called it a talent war, beginning of 2022 as well. Attrition levels were outrageous. Many of you here may not want to recall the painful times, but might not have forgotten them yet. But the market situation was improving, and we saw a little bit of that improvement. The fourth one, as appearing on the slide right now, is the fact that despite the slowdown in demand, the next gen tech skills were still kind of hard to find. So there was a bit of a struggle there. Let's see what happened on that front. With that, let us kick off in terms of some of the new messages we have for you today. The next 55 minutes will break into 4 parts. We'll share some key observations from last few months. We will share our key provocations. We call them provocations because we believe you really need to act on them, and not giving it a fair thought may put you in a position of disadvantage. We will end with our 5 key action items for IT leaders for next year, and then we'll keep some time for Q&A. At the same time, as Peter mentioned, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A window as we go along. Please use Q&A versus the chat window. That makes it easier for us to keep an eye out for them and address them as we go. Now, looking on the key trends, key observations from 2023, the first one, let's look at the IT and the BPS market growth, right? So as we move over to page number 5, we will see some of the key data emerge. Now, on page number 5, we have from the last 4 years, we are looking at the quarter-on-quarter growth for BPS, business process services, and IT services industry. As you will see, it dipped in 2020 around the COVID, but then it took off, which resulted in a talent war situation. And then it got either better or it slowed down But the key reason here is that there was an economic slowdown resulting in slowdown in demand. However, the supply side did not improve meaningfully to match up to the demand. And then there was a bit of a up and down in the ITS market with the demand, the growth really dipping in the last quarter. Our forecasts based on the deal situation, the demand expectation shows that this is likely to flip and fundamentals will start improving in Q1 2024. Now, what does that mean? We'll talk about that in the next few minutes. But as we look at some more data from this year, let's go to the next slide where we start looking at the demand and attrition data. Now, this is important. Why this is important is that we have earlier spoken about the gap in talent supply and demand. But when you look at the reasons why, if you look at the second half of this slide, the attrition has reduced and it has reduced significantly. That's a relief, but it has also happened because of the dip in demand. Now there was another spike of resurgence towards the middle of the year, but it dipped very quickly, as visible from many quarterly results from leading IT services companies. What we are warning towards, what we are building towards, if you can already anticipate, is that another resurgence in demand may create a similar situation as a couple of years ago, because the supply side dynamics are not improving. And to further show you why, let's look at some of the demand supply dynamics in the next generation skills. So on the next page, we have laid out data for the gap in demand supply for some of the leading 12 to 15 tech skills. So on the x-axis, on the chart shows the gap in demand and supply, and the larger the gap means the demand exceeds supply by that much. So it's a kind of a not a great news the further any skill is on the x-axis. And on the y-axis, we are further mapping which skill is growing in demand or expected to grow in demand during the 2023-2024 phase. So the further you are up in the top right, that means there is a strong gap and there is a strong growth in demand, which is further expected to increase that gap. So if you look at it, anything on this chart reflects a hiring situation, a challenge, but a lot of these skills which do not have sizable market right now are actually expected to witness strong demand growth and hence a lot of challenge expected. Now, we wanted to start with some market data and reinforce some of the messages. They also relate to the messages we shared earlier this year. Amir, this was data, and data tells one part of the story. You have been very closely observing what companies have been doing in the last few months, and we saw a very divided world. Some thought there is no problem anymore, macroeconomic situation will make it go away. Some were really in a firefighting mode, continued to be, and others were somewhere in the middle. Do share some observations that you have had in the last few months. What have companies been doing?
Right, Rohit. So if I look at one of the another major trend that we observed in 2022, and if we move on to the next slide, what we have seen that there was a substantial shift in the overall talent strategy mindset. And when I say the talent strategy mindset, I mean that back in 2021, 2022, there was a substantial talent crunch, especially for the tech roles, right? And enterprises were reacting to this very evidently. We saw that there was a significant hike in compensation and non-statutory benefits. And due to this, we saw that several enterprises, they tend to overhire. And there were compromises in the quality of talent they hired. But as we entered into 2023, what we have seen that this approach has been more sustainable and more targeted. So we have seen companies investing targeted into skills such as digital skills, which have a high demand supply gap and have continued to show higher growth rate, as we saw on the last chart. Moreover, we have also seen that companies are increasingly leveraging skill-based hiring over formal hiring. They are leveraging data-driven metrics. And evidently, it appears that talent acquisition as a whole strategic function has become more important when we look at building the pipeline and creating targeted pipeline for these roles and emerging skills. So this was another interesting area that we observed in 2023. And moving on, next key trend that we observed was a shift in, and as we transition to our next slide, we will see that there was a major shift in this stance towards remote work. If I compare this stance from the end of 2022, a large number of, in fact, the majority of the service providers and enterprises were keen on adopting the predominantly work from home kind of hybrid model. But as we entered into 2023, and in fact, the early quarter of 2023, what we observed that a lot of these service providers heading this wave, followed by a lot of enterprises, they changed their stance to bringing people back in the office with at least 1 to 3 days in office. As of now, what we have seen that more than 60% of these enterprises have mandated at least 1 to 3 days in office so far. We've also seen several companies, providing a lot of other non-statutory benefits and other incentives apart from compensation, to bring back employees to the office. Even if you look at some of the data in terms of return to office outlook as of 2023 and 2024, now, if I compare this to a year back in 2022, what we have seen significant increase in the work from office kind of model. Although if I talk about the most prevailing model, it is still hybrid, but it is office first hybrid.
I mean, what's really interesting has also been the maturity or the evolution in the maturity in terms of the reasons for doing this. So it all started with coming from a little bit of discomfort from frontline managers, senior stakeholders who wanted to see their teams in office. But in the last 1.5 years, one thing we have also seen is that some of that has reduced as companies have invested in trainings, better technology solutions. But what has emerged are challenges related to growth, challenges related to upshift in the learning curves, challenges related to increased isolation of certain individuals, especially in employees who have not been in company for longer time, and challenges related to the unknown, unexpected, positive outcomes that come from unplanned interactions among employees. So the last 2 years have given everybody time to reflect on that and notice the differences where employees feel to be lacking something. And I'm generalizing here, but people believe that they're not so well connected. They don't always have the full picture. So everything has to be very meticulously planned and imparted, which sometimes becomes very burdensome, whereas natural ways of learning are more interactive and social. So a lot of those reasons now feeding into making this happen. And we see relatively more buy-in from employees as well. This last 2 weeks, interestingly, sparked a lot of debate in India and worldwide, because one of the key IT leaders, for the industry made a comment on number of working hours that individuals should strive for. And it sparked a debate on productivity, work-life balance, where should you work from, how much should you work? And it was fairly interesting. I'll take a question in the chat, and then Amir, tell me your thoughts on this as well, is that there are very concerning updates coming in from India legacy IT companies. So how do we see the growth in talent demand and employee base? That's the question in the chat window, one of the few that I caught. What we would say is that, yes, quarter on quarter, that's the case for some companies. And yes, some companies have witnessed net decline in headcount as well. However, when you double click on that and you look at it from company to company and team to team, business unit to business unit, for core IT and next gen IT, we still see a fairly strong demand. A. B. Some of these companies had overhired in anticipation of expected growth, which has not come. So a little bit of that is correction as well. Lastly, while in the short term, because of the economic slowdown, some companies may be seeing negative growth. We do anticipate another resurgence in demand in 1 quarter or 3 quarter. We don't know for sure, but definitely there are structural factors. And as you saw, some of our initial analysis that dictate that as the market kicks back, there is a dearth of supply that will create a situation. Amir, anything you want to add on
And
this particular
right.
question before we go
And
on?
Rohit, I feel that the market is still remains very optimistic, right? On one hand, if I look at all the economic factors, macroeconomic factors pointing towards a dip. But if I look at some of the recent announcements, and I remember the example of one of a major, big tech firm, which announced more than 30% growth in revenue this year, right? So what I feel that, and even our internal analysis, through our internal analysis, we believe that maybe by the end of quarter 1, we might see, a changing trend in this graph, the one which is constantly dipping at this point. But yeah, I feel that it remains optimistic, at least for the next half of, after the next half of 2024. All right. So moving on to the next biggest trend that we observed in 2023. And this was one of the biggest development, which was the emergence of generative AI and the entire ecosystem around generative AI. So this marked a significant event, particularly in the tech landscape. Now, if I talk about the adoption of generative AI by taking the example of ChatGPT, so we saw that the adoption to reach 1 million was so quick that it surpassed most of the disruptive technology and big tech apps in its time, right? Reaching 1 million in just 5 days. Now, one of our recent surveys, what we found out was that more than 95% of enterprise leaders, they believe that generative AI is going to have a very significant impact on the way their company sources and delivers services. Another stat by US Bureau of Labor Statistics also predicted that some of the key building roles, which would cater to this generative AI wave, such as data science, AI, ML kind of roles, have seen a huge growth rate and are also expected to see a surge. So these were some of the key trends that we observed throughout 2023. And with this, let us move to our next section.
Amir, before we move on, one offer for everybody dialing in today. I see a few hundred of our attendees, and thank you for a lot of questions as well. We will try to cover as many questions during the discussion and Q&A as possible. And then some of us will follow up with you later in terms of there is a lot of demand for some additional data on the comments we have made so far. One offer to all of you is that we did an extensive study on the disruption generative AI is causing in the global business services industry. All those who are interested, do use the link in the chat to request for the full copy of the report we published a couple of months back. With that, let's move on to a quick poll we have for all of you today, and then we'll dive into the 5 provocations we have. So, Amir, do you want to ask the question?
All right. So before we deep dive into the 5 provocations that we have, let us ask a question to the audience. So what do you think are the biggest focus areas for you as you frame your strategy for 2024? Interestingly, we have already started to see some answers.
Yeah, this is very exciting. Let's give it a few more seconds. I see a good distribution across most of the options.
And Rohit, while we receive these inputs, I would like to take this time to ask you, right, based on some of your recent conversation with some of our clients and industry leaders, what do you think or what have you been hearing, in terms of the key concerns in mind when they're framing their strategy for the next year?
Yeah.
Have you heard anything on this?
Yeah, I see more than almost 2/3 of our respondents have already given their input. So calling the poll now, and as we share the results, I think I'm not surprised. More than half want to strengthen their talent pipeline for 2024 projections. And then generative AI, it's a bit of an enigma. Everybody wants to see how much will it impact and how quickly. So that's not surprising at all. What is concerning a little bit are the lower two options, Amir. At
Right.
23% is enhancing our employer's brand. We will talk a little bit about it in our provocations, but that's a miss I see personally, because we have seen a lot of companies take that for granted and then pay the price. And what remains a bit of a revelation, unfortunately, is that despite all the focus on sustainability, people, and the EIB, the dedicated investments in improving that strategy is still 3%. Now, part of it could be because companies have already invested and don't see it changing, but still 3% is lower than desired, if I might share my
Right.
personal opinion. So a little bit of that, companies needing to do more consciously on those areas. But we'll unpack those one by one. Why don't you take us through the first provocation?
Right. So moving ahead, let us come to our first provocation, whereby we believe that generative AI is going to disrupt the service delivery. And as enterprises, we need to be very quick to adapt to these changes and incorporate it into our overall talent strategy as we move towards 2024. Moving forward, so we believe that the emergence of generative AI is undeniably transforming the entire talent market in numerous profound ways, right? But the first and the foremost is that organizations are actively redefining their hiring strategies. They recognize the growing importance of roles related to AI and data science, which would cater to the entire era or the domain of generative AI, whether it is the inception of AI models, whether it is the integration, implementation, tuning of these models. And if I were to just talk about some of the big names here, right? And these are some of the very recent, news coming up from some of these global leaders in terms of building a pipeline. Now, a lot of these companies are very bullish on AI. They believe that this is going to have a major impact on the way they operate, and hence they're planning in advance to stay ahead of the curve, right? Now, interestingly, a lot of these names have already included this in their 2024 strategy or 2024 planning. Also, if I look at the survey from LinkedIn, it is projected that more than 65% of the current job skills is going to change by the impact of AI. Now this number is very interesting to note, Rohit, and I think this will be very interesting to watch as we enter into 2024, and maybe if we have the next quarterly webinar. So it will be good to project on this and see where it drifted. All right. So moving on, as generative AI becomes more integrated into our daily lives, it is very important to realize that it's not only changing the landscape of our existing roles, but it is also giving birth to some of the entirely new positions that would demand AI skills. Now, if I look at some of the generative AI job titles gaining prominence, right? Uh, Interestingly, most of these roles are in the development space. Now, when we say development, it could be in the software architecture, software engineering, even data science, platform development, calibration, platform integration kind of roles. Uh, at this point, I remember a recent conversation with one of our client who mentioned that a lot of service providers and vendors are integrating generative AI into their offerings and even charging higher premiums to this. So when we did our own dipstick and did the analysis, we found that a lot of the new job descriptions have included, knowledge about generative AI, model implementation, and so on. So this is very interesting to watch, and we are keeping a close eye on this to see how this rolls out and what are the new roles coming up. Uh, and when I talk about new roles coming up, so definitely some of the niche roles related to generative AI. Now, this could be around prompt engineering, generative AI training, prompt tuning engineering, AI moderator. So these are some of the roles which we have seen as of now popping up as some of the new roles. and we expect to see many more new roles coming up. Now, these examples highlight the diverse and evolving nature of these roles, which are in response to the impact of generative AI. Moving on, we also believe that generative AI will have a very profound and significant impact on the entire HR and talent management value chain. Now, if I look at the estimate of the potential impact, we believe that some areas like talent acquisition and learning and development is definitely going to be a very high impact area when we talk about the impact of generative AI. And within these also, there are some high impact areas listed on this slide, whereby we believe that screening, job description, content development, job pricing would be some sub functions which will be more impacted than others. And Rohit, at this point, I remember a very interesting conversation which we had last week, whereby one of our clients mentioned that after the advent of ChatGPT, the talent acquisition team has been receiving more than 90% of accurate JDs, right? Which was close to 25 to 30%. So, do you think this is this is leveling the field for TA team versus the potential candidates?
Yeah, I would say it's a catch-up game. Employees are using the same technology. It is open source that employers are using. So as employers try to use the latest technology to improve their ability to scan, create JDs, scan resumes, all of that, employees are also using the same technology to create uh, more chances of success, especially in the initial filtering process. So not only the adoption of technology, but I think the bigger change that the workforce, the human workforce will need is in the way they work, the understanding how they can use technology to be more efficient, but also how the others they are working with are using technology. So to be more aware, right? So it poses both an opportunity and a challenge, which of course is part of the evolution. Now, Mihir, I know despite all of this, there has been a little bit of problem in hiring talent on time. Uh, how do you see that changing next year, and what are your inputs for our listeners today?
Certainly, Rohit. So, what we have observed is talent acquisition, as you rightly pointed out, Rohit, is not only getting affected by generative AI, but if we move on to the next slide, we'll come to our second provocation where we can see that talent acquisition is also getting affected by longer hiring times. Now we realize that currently the demand is lower and hiring as such is not a big challenge. But as you pointed out, Rohit, hiring right skill at right time is still a challenge. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we can observe that post-pandemic, hiring time has increased by more than 40%. Now, this increase cannot be analyzed in isolation. It has to be analyzed from the perspective of current talent market landscape because over the time, the bottleneck for hiring has shifted from one part of the process to another part of the process. Now we all know that a lot of activity happens even before the job post is rolled out. And then there is, of course, a lot of song and dance till the offer is extended and candidate actually joins the firm. In 2021, 2022, just post the pandemic, the challenge was that candidates had multiple offers in hand. And that's why the offer rejection at the last point was higher. That led to increase in hiring time. But currently, the challenge is not offer rejection by the candidates, but the current challenge is mobilizing the passive job seekers. Just to clarify, passive job seekers are employees who are currently employed and are not looking for opportunities, but are open to better career opportunities if any opportunity pops up. One of the recent LinkedIn research, in fact, estimates that 70% of the global talent workforce can be classified as passive job seekers. The slowdown in the entire hiring activity that actually followed the hiring boom has affected the morale of employees, and employees are more disinterested now to apply for jobs. And of course, another challenge is getting the final approvals for hiring. In the current times when there is general uncertainty in the market, there is higher business scrutiny of hiring need, and that is actually leading to higher increased time as well. Now, if we move on, now that we understand what exactly is affecting the hiring timelines, it is necessary to understand how organizations can still strategize to optimize the hiring time. One of the first key tenets is better demand forecasting. Organizations need to adapt demand-based approach to forecasting. Now, what we have observed is multiple researchers suggest that any talent analytics program uh, can improve hiring productivity by approximately 40%. But surprisingly, only 14% of the organization have any such talent analytics program. Another key element is better candidate experience. Now, as I already mentioned, the challenge is passive job seekers. Therefore, it is more than necessary to keep the candidates engaged at all points of the hiring process. And the final point is obviously expanding and diversifying the talent pipelines. As we also saw in the polls, that is one of the focus areas for most of the organization, strengthening their talent pipelines. We have seen organizations putting in focused efforts to do this. In recent times, we have also seen that there is an uptick in the use of different social media channels for improving the talent pipeline. Now, now that we have seen talent acquisition and how it will be impacted by next generation technology and another challenges in hiring time, that brings us to our third provocation for the day, where we believe that uh, organizations need to pivot to uh, skill-based workforce development approach to build a future-ready workforce. Today, the key lies in building a workforce that is adaptable and is equipped with excellent skill sets. And how organizations can do that is they can start by defining and managing a skills repository so that they will have a clearer picture of their current skills and what are their future skill needs. Once they have identified their skill gaps, organizations can create defined career paths and learning journeys for their employees, and through curated learning interventions, be it through formal training, informal training, peer learning, organizations can uh, enable the employees to fill those skill gaps by learning those skills. And once the employees have achieved those skills, offering an internal talent mobility program will enable employees to actually seek out the jobs which they demanded, which they were working for. Now, I know, Amir, you have been working with our clients, helping them uh, build a skill-based workforce development approach. Why don't you share how actually organizations can do this?
Right, Mir. And I think this is a very interesting area, and I'm sure enterprises have been, looking for answers to this. So if we move to the next slide, uh, I basically wanted to talk on the notable shift in terms of the skill model that we have seen. Now, when I talk about this shift, what we have witnessed is the movement away from the traditional experience-based career path, and instead we now see a skill-based model. Now, this model allows us as employees, now this allows employees to chart their own journeys. I can talk about this by taking an example. So, if we look at the career journey of a software engineer, a typical employee starts at a junior level software engineer, moves on the ladder to become a senior software engineer, and further progresses to reach team lead and so on. Now, this is a hierarchy-based career pathway which was very prevalent earlier. Currently, what we are observing in the market is a lot of leading enterprises are integrating their competency framework, which defines the skills breakdown, with their career framework, which defines what are your possible movement areas. Now, for example, a software engineer could move into a cloud engineer, into a business analyst, data analyst, or even a data scientist, if we can actually break down the existing competency and define a skill competency for this, identify the skill gaps, and also we define what are the possible career frameworks. Now, in my opinion, we can think about this from both the perspective of employees and employers. So this can empower individuals to take control of their own career trajectories, but it can also allow the organizations to harness the potential of their workforce in the more demanding areas and help them try and understand and gain more visibility, if I were to say so, within the skill-based model. So this is one approach in which we can we can actually think about the 4 steps that you mentioned.
And Amir,
Rohit, yeah,
interestingly, this also really brings up the conversation around the two different sides we see parallelly existing in the industry, right? On one
Right.
side, companies want to hire more. Some of them are struggling. Some of them cannot because they don't have permissions. On the other side, companies are still laying off talent, believe they have excess talent. The gap we see is limited internal mobility, limited investments in changing career paths. Now, there are some companies that do that really well. In fact, one of the top tech companies is really using the downtime to invest in reskilling, have 2 to 3 year career pathway options available to their employees. Another bank, which has about 25,000 people in their internal IT captives, says that almost 60% of the new hiring needs should be addressed internally because we have such a large talent base. We know those people, we know their skills, we can train them because project ready talent is not available out there. So this is a big factor that needs to be addressed. You said interestingly that this is from both from an employee-employer perspective. Let's uncover the employee perspective a little bit more as we look onto our next provocation on how what employees want is more control over their career pathways. So you have a very nice, graphic on the next slide, Amir. Explain to us what does this mean and what are you
Right.
asking companies who are listening in today to do to improve employee engagement in their L&D initiatives.
Right, Rohit. So Rohit rightly mentioned, our analysis suggests that today the employee value flexibility and the autonomy to choose their own career path. Now, to achieve this, it is very important to align the organizational needs with the employee aspirations. And creating this balance is what we call as sustainable learning and development model. Now, this model is about a balance between employee goals, accelerated career path, higher compensation, flexibility. And when this is married with the right talent, the right right price, which is the organization lead, can lead us to the sustainable model. Now, to create this sustainable models, there are certain key drivers, which are namely, which we have bracketed into 3 major categories, right? There could be more drivers, but according to us, we believe that these are the 3 key wheels of this sustainable L&D model. The first one would be a clear visibility into skills, demand, and supply to help organizations and even the employees assess and target the more in-demand skills. This could be around next-gen skills, digital skills. So this could help them try and see which are the growth areas for the future in the coming years. Another driver would be a standardization of a skill taxonomy to break it further by level skill clusters, the adjacencies, by which I mean the adjacent roles in which they can transfer, and defining a clear skill passport for each of these roles. Lastly, being open to provide with more non-linear career pathways. Now, we know that historically we have seen a lot of career pathways being allowed by companies, but these have been more linear. A software developer would eventually move into similar roles into development. But what I'm asking you now is being more open to a non-linear career pathways, right? Maybe a person in development could move into cloud or data science or AI. Rohit, do you want
This
to
is
add something
very
on this? I know.
interesting. This is very interesting. I can't hold my excitement. Can you show us how can somebody actually execute this? Do you have any example you can show us?
Right. So let us move to the next slide. And now once we understand the sustainable L&D model, so the question arises: how can we actually operationalize this practically? Now, to operationalize this, organizations can start by creating a standardized skill taxonomy and mapping the competencies for each role by their skill and proficiency level. Now, the next step would be to create a centralized skill database and keep on updating this, based on internal assessments, individual assessments, manage, assessment by the manager, or even automated tracking of skills in terms of, by looking at the current demand and the future projected demand. Lastly, once we have this skill inventory ready, a person who is in a source role, let's say a technology analyst, identifies a future role as a business analyst. Now, at this stage, the person knows what are the skill requirement for the next role, and hence he has the visibility into the skill gaps, which is very crucial at this stage. Once we have the visibility into the skill gap and the time duration, which eventually would be needed to actually transition to the next role, this will create a lot of visibility and enable the efficient workforce mobility. So I just wanted to take an example and try and visualize in a very layman term.
Yeah. No, Amit, this is very intriguing. And I know you have tons of data and multiple examples of career trajectories, which we call skills passports. So that's a passport for employees to move from one role to another within the organization based on, in a way, the skills they have or the visas they have in their skills passport. So we are very curious about this topic. At the same time, we cover it in a lot of depth. We would love from you to hear more in terms of how are you approaching this. This is an area which has witnessed multiple investments from large global companies to kind of upskill, reskill their employees. So we would love to hear more and share more. Do reach out to us separately. A quick reminder before we move on is that we are getting a lot of questions on generative AI or related aspects in the Q&A. We have addressed some, but just to remind to everyone, there is a link available in the chat that you can use to request for our recent research report on the topic. As we move on, Mihir, the only about 23% of our few hundred listeners today said that a brand development or investing in promoting their brand among employees is not the top of the mind agenda. That is less than 1 in 4. But your fifth provocation is to prioritize efforts of cultivating and maintaining a strong brand perception. If we go to the next slide, can you tell us why do you say so?
Definitely, Rohit. So employer brand perception is basically how current and prospective employees perceive organization brand. And we believe, as you rightly said, Rohit, that it is one of the crucial magnet that attracts or repels talent. And to answer your question, I would like to quote our results from this year's study. So earlier this year, we conducted a study where we analyzed employer brand perception of nearly 400 plus organizations across US and India. To analyze the employer brand perception of these organizations, we used all the publicly available information on various job forums, employee review forums, and social media. This study was designed to understand the outside in looking perspective, because that's how any prospective employee will look at the employer brand perception of this organization. And what we find, the results are really fascinating. If we see in the United States alone, 56% of the organization have seen deterioration in their employer brand perception compared to 2020. And the same number in India is 41%. So it tells us a story that employer brand perception is getting negatively affected, even if, and that means organizations need to pay a more focus on it. And we have actually seen that happening, because if you see at the other side, there are few organizations across US and India that have actually managed to improve the employer brand perception. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we can actually deep dive into what affects the employer brand perception. So this is basically compilation of employees, voice of employees from the study. So these are all the themes that emerged from the analysis and that talk about what works for employees and what basically builds a positive employer brand perception against what builds a negative employer brand perception. And the results speak for themselves, right? Because if we see clearly, the two most important positive drivers are clear career path visibilities and upskilling initiative. Now, that's what you have been talking about, Amir, few slides back. The importance of clear career path, the upskilling initiatives by organization, all that helps in creating a positive employer brand perception. And that all matters to employees. Uh, Again, if we see what are the negative drivers for employees, same themes emerge: unclear career growth opportunities, lack of working model flexibility. Obviously, the factors around compensation are going to be there. But to summarize quickly, employees are not only driven by compensation alone, but they are also forming a positive brand perception from the upskilling initiatives, clear career path, job security, and other aspects. Now, Rohit, I know you have been in following this topic for a couple of years now. You have been involved in a lot of market discussions and industry in conversation with a lot of market industry leaders. Why don't you share your perspective on the same?
Hey, sorry, Mihir. I lost the bet today for speaking on mute. So yeah, a treat from me to both of you. But coming to your question, I was actually addressing a question on this topic in the chat window when you asked me. Uh, I think brand perception and being an employer of choice is a slippery slope. Important to recognize that success is not stable, and that showed in the data that you shared. Also, some of these elements are more sustained. Employees see through what you offer, and if it is not adding up, versus some of this needs to be continuously up to date. You can bring an employee for something great, but once they are in, they need a continuous refresher or a upgrade as well. So it's kind of the way you look at your consumers and what you need to manage them, retain them. Similar pivot towards your employees as well. I addressed a few questions on this in the Q&A, but what I would say is that refer to our research, which is in the source here. Those who are interested, reach out to us. We can guide you towards the full report. But there is a full report on impact of work from home as a lever, what parameters or what drivers bring people in, the various different aspects here broken down into data and listed in terms of the impact they have on the brand perception and then satisfaction of companies, employees from their employers. So all of that is there in the analysis. We are kind of short on time today, so we'll move on. And to summarize our 5 key actions that we encourage those who are listening in today to think about as you want to maintain and build your competitive edge in the talent market is number one, your generative AI has brought in a lot of unknowns. But what is known for sure is that the role of human capital is changing at a faster pace than desired. I don't say expected, but I say desired because change is difficult. So figuring out in the context of your organization, how much of that technology are you going to adopt and what does that mean from a 6 month, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year horizon, and accordingly preparing your teams for that change. It is not always a loss of jobs or new jobs, but for most, it is change in the way they operate. And that makes people a bit disconnected. So focus on that. Talent acquisition funnel, as Amir, you in the earlier slide broke it down. Each step is important. There is no silver bullet. So meticulous planning and focus on that is important. Amir, you spoke about skill-based workforce planning. I think that's very critical. There were some questions in the chat again around, this is good data, but how do we really translate that at an org level? We have some extensive case studies on that. So for those who are interested, do reach out. I would say it's not like any company has cracked this completely. It's not, one and done solution, but there are best practices that we have seen. We have a full report on skilling and then career pathing. So happy to share more research. Career flexibility, again, a related point, very important. And lastly, we just spoke about prioritizing brand, development and then maintenance efforts. So do look into that. We will take some questions in the remaining time. But before we do that, I want to once again remind everyone that for those who are interested in generative AI report, do use the link in the chat and or write to us for a copy of that report. For all the questions where we said we will follow up, you will hear from us in the next few days, but do reach out to us as well. And we are right now studying the key issues which are top of the mind for global leaders, enterprise leaders for next year. So we have a few hundred responses already, and every day more pouring in. We are sharing the early inputs in a webinar on 12th of December. Do participate, do listen in. If you want to share your inputs, you have a link to participate in the survey as well. Now we have about 8 minutes at hand. I think about 3 to 4 questions. I'm scanning through the questions. I'll take one which is a very relevant one. So it says that there was a question around impact of AI on decrease in demand. You found the answer a bit evasive. I hear you. Could you provide some insights on where that war for talent is going to? Let me take that, and then Amir Mihir, please add if you have something to add. Is that we believe that the shift to new jobs is not clear, right? There is a directional understanding, but how will it apply to individual companies and different teams is not clear. So that is the step one. Companies understanding that while this is happening outside in their organizations, what is going to change. Secondly, while Amir earlier today talked about the new roles that are getting created, new jobs that are getting created, those skills that are needed, there is not so much in IT, but more so in some of the other back office jobs, where some of the jobs may go away, which are to be automated largely. But the largest impact will be on the ways of working that we were just speaking about a couple of minutes back as well. So that is where we see the investments. For example, there was another question around will it take jobs away from India or to India, and how is that linked to remote hiring? What we are saying is that companies need to break it down and understand what are the skills they are going to need and where are those skills available within the org, outside the org, or if not available, how are they going to develop them, either upskill existing workforce or hire? There is the next level of the answer is fairly complicated. So we are happy to do a follow-on discussion on that. It will be hard to unpack it completely on this call here. Let me ask you this another question. Amir, is that
Yeah.
what is the willingness to pay for generative AI projects? People are asking for use cases, but how much is this converting into RFPs? Do you have
Right.
any
And
inputs on that?
great. I think it's a great question. Right? I was about to take this one. So I think I'll try and answer this from two perspectives, right? In terms of doing a detailed study on the use cases for a particular industry. Now I look at this from a service provider point of view versus an enterprise. So at the last few months, enterprises were equally very aggressive and trying to find out what could be the possible use cases. But recently, what I've seen is that service providers are already investing to do a deep dive and a study on identifying the use cases. But we have seen somewhat slowdown in terms of enterprises. Now, in terms of getting approval for projects from generative AI, what we are hearing is that uh, people so far are not able to actually find a concrete use case which could be actually implemented inside their organization. And given the current scenario of the overall economic dip, what we feel that the overall management is somewhat hesitant to actually invest till the time they find a really viable use cases where they can quantify some ROI. But yeah, in terms of service providers, we are seeing a lot of study going on, to try and do a deep dive on various industries like CXM or trust and safety on what could be done, what are the possible areas. I hope that answers your question.
Great. And if you're not satisfied, you want to continue the dialogue, do reach out to Amir.
Please.
Another question for you, Mihir. I'm just reading out aloud. Not sure I have seen or heard incentives to return to office. Companies are even threatening to withdraw certain benefits. For example, a bank said that they will not give people a bonus or pay rise if they're not back in office. To what extent do you see adoption of incentives to bring people back? And would you have any best practices to share?
Definitely, Rohit. So there have been some incentives. Organizations have been incentivizing people to come back to the office. But right now, at least in India, if we consider that service providers have driven this move back to work from office, it has been more of a mandatory approach. So not actually incentivizing, but it's more from the angle of you do not come, it's a punishment. So that has been happening, but there have been some cases where uh, the organizations are incentivizing, and they have been doing it for a while. It's not something that they are trying it right now, but incentives from the perspective of events, meetups, gala events, or informal events, and some food reimbursement, cab reimbursement. We have seen those, but going forward, we expect that it would go. The incentives are not here to stay. They are just to attract the talent, but they will not keep on continuing with these incentives.
Got it. Thanks, Mihir. We are running out of time, so let me take a couple of questions very quickly before we wrap up. There's a question if leaders need to be careful. Absolutely. Refer to our top employees research. Leadership is and then leadership perception and their mindset, their view is one of the key elements of the overall brand perception. They need to be very much aware. There's a challenge of adoption of skilling initiatives. Yes, we have a dedicated report on best practices to improve skilling strategies. So I would request you to reach out to Amir and we can help you with that analysis as well. AI, has Gen AI been used to provide guidance for employees on career pathing? Not at a scale yet, but we are seeing some companies integrate that. We are working with a couple of our clients who are building that in. This is starting to add up. The problem is the baseline data on current inventory in terms of skills is not existing. And then the roles are planned in terms of job people need to do versus the skills they need to have. So there's a bit of a disconnect there, but we are seeing movement in that direction. Happy to continue the dialogue. Last question we can take today is which locations outside India are growing in IT skills? Really good question. Answer varies by geography. Within Asia, uh, we see uptick in Philippines. We see selective uptick in locations like Malaysia, a use of Singapore, Thailand, etc. Vietnam for some skills, and then a few others. Within Europe, Poland became very kind of heavy in terms of increase in demand, especially after the Ukraine-Russia war. So shift towards Baltics, shift towards other Romania, other locations. In the Latin America, Costa Rica continues to be one location. Mexico has seen an uptick as well. Different type of needs being fulfilled from Argentina or Brazil and then Colombia as well. So the answer really varies. Canada is a nearshore option that more companies are exploring, and then tier 3, tier 4 in US as well. Happy to continue. It's again fairly broad-based discussion. One final reminder to reach out to any of us if you have any more questions. We will get back to you on some of the promises we made today, and hopefully you enjoyed the discussion.